Right, now for the hustings for ex-leaders. Yeah, come up here, Pat. Well, I know you may find this rather surprising, but I was 75 years old last week. Now, I know I look a lot older, but 46 years of living with Christine takes its toll, doesn't it? I can say that because she's not here. But I know she's listening somewhere, thanks to Mr. Xi Jinping. But there we are. Lots of people have come up to me today and wished me well in my retirement. But I can tell you I'm not going to retire. I'm going to remain very active in UKIP, and I'm going to give every possible assistance to my successor, having seen Bill and Lois today. Of course, I know them both very, very well, and indeed Anne-Marie, this applies to her as well. Whoever my successor is, UKIP is going to be in very, very good hands indeed. And we haven't always been able to say that in leadership hustings, have we? Looking back at recent experience. But there we are. But one of the main reasons why I'm going to continue active in politics after a lifetime doing this is because I am angry, bloody angry, at the way our country has been abused and betrayed and almost destroyed by a political class that is now so deracinated, so far from the instincts of ordinary people who put them there, that we really need to do something about it still. And although the torch is being passed to a new generation, I want to help keep that flame alive as well. And I mean, it's now 60 years this year since I first got involved in politics. In fact, first time I ever stood as a candidate for anything was in October 1964. If you can imagine in a time so remote. It was just after the Iron Age had finished, I think. But when I stood as a candidate in the school mock election for the general election of 1964, when Harold Wilson first became Prime Minister. And then 3 years after that, in 1967, when I was 17 years old, I joined the Anti-Common Market League. That was, of course, 6 years before we became members of the Common Market. So I was looking ahead. And I became a member of the Anti-Common Market League because I believed in Britain. I didn't believe that Britain was a country in decline. Well, in a sense it was. Same reason then as it is now. Because the British people were being failed by the political class who had allowed Britain to turn in upon itself and to regard itself as increasingly a basket case and a failure. That we couldn't do the things for ourselves that we ought to be able to do and wanted to do. And that if we joined this new outfit on the continent of Europe, by a process of osmosis, somehow things were going to change, that we were useless and couldn't do things for ourselves. And the whole Brexit campaign was a denial of that lack of self-confidence. And unfortunately, one of the main things I've learned out of a lifetime in politics is that these battles have constantly to be refought. The battle is never fully won. And my goodness, we know that about Brexit, don't we? Because we've got Brexit in name only. And the battle for Brexit is unfinished. Northern Ireland is still part of the European Union. It is governed by the laws that are made by Brussels. In fact, things are even worse in Northern Ireland now than when we were formal members of the EU, because they don't have members of the European Parliament. We don't have a British commissioner in the European Commission. There is no representation. Northern Ireland is a colony of the Brussels Empire. And how any self-respecting British politician could for a moment countenance that part of our country should be removed from the democratic context of the United Kingdom, I simply cannot understand. That's one of the things that makes me really angry, that the United Kingdom is in fact being disunited again by the failures of our politicians. The whole process of devolution, Scotland and Wales, and I was a member of the Welsh Parliament for UKIP, leader of the UKIP group there for 5 years until 2021. In the 20 years of devolution, Wales has gone backwards, not forwards, because they've had a Labour government the whole time since the Welsh Parliament was created. And they, as you know, have just made it mandatory all over Wales for cars to go no faster than 20 miles an hour in urban areas. But I mean, the whole of Wales is in economic slow lane in the United Kingdom and the world. And of course, this is what the left want for the whole of the United Kingdom as well, not just in terms of 20-mile-an-hour limits, but the whole green agenda actually is to turn the British economy into a kind of Flintstone economy. We're going back to prehistoric times in the way that we run ourselves and the way that we live in order to save the planet. Well, we all know what the truth of that is. But going back to my own story, the first time I ever stood for Parliament was 50 years ago this year, in February 1974, when I fought the constituency of Abertillery, which was a mining seat in Wales. It was Labour's strongest seat, actually. In the 1970 election, before I was the candidate, Labour got 85% of the votes in that election. It's the sort of election result which we used to get in Albania and perhaps still get in North Korea, which is, of course, what the Labour government in Wales is still trying to turn Wales into, a kind of mini version of North Korea, but not quite as successful. But and after a long and hard campaign in Abertillery, I managed to convert the 10% that my predecessor got into 6.5%. So, but it was the 3-day week and the miners' strike in 1974, and it was in a very, very cold February, so getting people out to vote wasn't easy. But at least it was the start of my parliamentary career. Of course, I had opposed the principal achievement of the Heath government, which was thrown out in that very same election, which was taking this country into what was then the European Economic Community. And the whole of my political life has been devoted to turning back that tide. And I'm still devoted to that endeavour today, and I will be until my dying day, which I hope is not for a little while yet, so that I'll still be troubling you with my presence at events such as this. But over the last 50 years, I've been a candidate in 8 parliamentary elections. The last one as recently as 2019, was it? When I fought the Newport West by-election for UKIP. And I got 9% of the vote in that by-election. And there's no reason why in future by-elections we can't get back to that sort of level of voting. Reform are actually not getting that percentage on balance. If you look at the election results, by-election results that we've seen over the last couple of years, their average vote has been 3, 4, 5%. But UKIP was routinely getting 20, 30, 40% of the vote in by-elections before the Brexit referendum. I want to see UKIP getting back to those sort of percentages so that we really do change the political weather again, as we did to get the referendum in the first place and then to win it. But I've also done other things in the course of my political career. I was a government minister under Margaret Thatcher and under John Major, and perhaps one of the most bizarre things I ever did, thanks to John Major, was become a member of the European Union Council of Ministers, which was a bit like making King Herod a minister for children, in a way. Where I conceived my role as being, A, to block everything that I could. If I couldn't manage that, at least to delay it and kick it into the long grass for as long as possible. And if, against all my efforts, it did go through, to make sure none of our money was going to be spent on it. And I have to say I was pretty successful in doing that as the Internal Market Minister for 2.5 years. So, it's been a long political journey for me, the culmination of which has been the 4 years that I've now spent as the leader of UKIP. And I know that 75 seems old to some people, but by American standards, of course, it's quite young, isn't it? And so who knows that, like Donald Trump, in 4 years' time, I might be back again. And not if Christine has anything to do with it, though, I know, but she didn't want me to take it on in the first place. anybody who was part of the Zoom call at the NEC election when I was persuaded to do it, and I didn't realise she was in the background listening. And suddenly there was the sound of broken glass and crockery from all parts of the kitchen. But there we are. I am my own man, and I normally do exactly as she tells me, but on that occasion I thought my country came first. And so here I am today. But it's been a long political journey for me, and my whole political life has actually been one to find the rational underpinnings of my initial prejudices. And that's exactly what I've done. My political views, I'm proud of this actually, have never changed in their fundamentals in all the years since I first became aware of politics. Actually, my very first political memory is the Suez invasion. And I remember as a schoolboy, I was 7 years old at the time, we had to keep a daily diary. And I remember drawing pictures of British soldiers clubbing Arabs over the head. And I've become rather more sophisticated since then. But who knows, the way things are going, we may have to go back to that, mind we. But that was a joke, by the way, if this is being recorded. It wasn't like that at all, but there it is. In the very first American presidential election I can remember was in 1964, when the Republican candidate was Barry Goldwater. And I was much struck by what he said in that election, because he was dismissed as a crank and a lunatic politically by the mainstream media. Nothing much has changed in that department either in the United States or in this country. They're still the same North London Guardianista mentality which they were then. But Barry Goldwater said that moderation in defence of justice is no virtue, and extremism in defence of liberty is no vice. And so all my life I've been an extremist, and proud of being an extremist for liberty. And that, as you heard from both candidates today, is what UKIP really should be about. We must never waver in defence of British values, of tolerance, and of civilised values. And that's what's under attack in our country today. It is the civilised values and tolerance for which Britain traditionally has been known, principles that we have exported to all around the world. They haven't taken root in many parts of the world to which we've exported them, but at least we tried, and we still keep alive the flame of liberty in this country, and we must do all that we can to protect it from the threats previously without, in the form of dictators like Napoleon and Adolf Hitler, but the threat from within is far more sinister and more difficult to deal with unless we have the political will to do so. Now, in the 1930s, we had a generation of politicians that wouldn't face up to the looming menace, which was all too clear, even to those who lived at the time. It's not just with the benefit of hindsight. And we can see today the same kind of threat, albeit transmogrified into a different format than military invasion, but a kind of internal subconscious invasion to change the nature of our society itself within the United Kingdom. The consequences of this would be just as dire as if we were invaded in the formal sense that we have managed to protect ourselves from in previous centuries from abroad. Now we have to fight the same battle, but in a rather different form. But over the course of the last 50, 60 years, I've discovered as well that government is almost never the answer to a problem. It's much more often the problem itself. And we see that, of course, most graphically in the COVID pandemic, so-called pandemic at any rate. And I know it's in a situation where the disease, the so-called remedy to the disease was far worse than the disease itself. even in the health aspects of this, far more damage was done to the National Health Service and the health of the nation by the government's response to COVID than if the disease had just been allowed to run amok. I described it at the time when I spoke against every single measure that was introduced by the Welsh government, which was even worse than the UK government, in the Parliament in Cardiff. I described them all as a sledgehammer to miss a nut, which is exactly what happened, of course. And so the sledgehammer landed on our big toe and did far more damage as a result, because it then became septic and that flowed through into other parts of the body. And so the public finances were wrecked, and we now have the highest tax burden since the Attlee government in the late 1940s, under a Conservative government, so-called. So it's been a long, interesting and varied life, but I have discovered that governments have a very limited ability or capacity to do good, but they have almost infinite power to do harm. And that's why politicians need to be brought down from their high positions, and their citadels need to be assaulted by the public at large, because there will always be bureaucratic capture of our institutions. We see it not just in government, we see it in the media, we see it in the so-called charity sector, what I call the charity industrial sector, because these are industries in themselves now, all taken over by the wokerati, by the lefties, who couldn't possibly earn a living in the real world, have to make anything or do anything practical. All they can do is jabber away and make our lives a misery. That's something else that we have to fight. Now, the reason why I wanted to be in politics, apart from all those reasons I've just given, is because fundamentally I do believe that to have been born British is to draw first prize in the lottery of life. And Britain is a country which has far more to be proud of than to be ashamed of. Yet our governing classes reverse that. They think that to be British is something we've got to apologise for. When you think of all the great benefits which we have given to the world, this tiny set of islands on the periphery of northwest Europe, and we had a population perhaps of 5-6 million at the beginning of the 19th century, and yet Britain conquered a quarter of the known world, and it conquered it by and large by trade rather than by military conquest. And we gave to other parts of the world understandings of constitutional government, the rule of law, tolerance, freedom of speech, and sadly all that has been in headlong retreat over vast tracts of Africa and Asia, which once were coloured pink on the maps that I grew up with in school. I went to school in Wales, and we had a history master who was an ardent Welsh nationalist, even back in the early 1960s. But he said when he'd been a schoolboy himself in the 1930s, he'd always wanted us to bring Greenland into the British Empire because it was such a big blotch of pink on the map of the world, and how the maps of the world would have been so improved as a result. And I think it was things like that actually made me the kind of person I am today, is that I wanted the rest of the world to appreciate the great advantages of being British too. And that doesn't just mean in a formal sense of carrying a British passport, because all sorts of people now carry a British passport who I could wish didn't. It's because I think that Britain has contributed so much to civilization. That's fundamentally why I think that our country is a great country. And I won't bore you with a long list of all our achievements as a people. But I think decency is what comes to mind more than anything else, is what Britain has given to the world at large. A sense of how important the individual is vis-à-vis the state. We've never had dictators in this country apart from Oliver Cromwell in the 17th century, although we live under a different kind of dictatorship today, which isn't in the hands of a single individual. we're under the dictatorship of a political class that we still exist to fight. But I do believe, in the words of Cecil Rhodes, that we are the best people in the world, with the highest ideals of decency and justice and peace. And the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for humanity. These are unfashionable sentiments to express today, for which I might even be accused of hate crime. God forbid. Who would have thought it of me, the most tolerant individual? In the course of 46 years of living with Christine to be quiet, passive, and submissive, but there it is. But in a way, I'm disappointed with my life that I had started out with such high aspirations of how our country would progress and develop, and then I came to realise, as I said earlier on, that all the battles that I fought in my generation have to be fought by the next generation, and no doubt will have to be fought by generations to come, because every generation has to learn by its mistakes. But that means there is going to be a continuing need for UKIP. I'm sorry to say, it's not just a life sentence, it's more than a life sentence. But nevertheless, we should be proud and enthusiastic to perform this role, because, as I said earlier on, again, Brexit was formally achieved, but hasn't actually been achieved in any meaningful sense, except we no longer make a contribution to the European Union budget. But we haven't changed the corpus of legislation that we had on the statute book in 2021 in any meaningful particular. And as Lois was saying in her speech earlier on, we need to fight for Britain's internal independence now from all the horrors that have been imposed upon us by our own native governments over recent generations as well. And so what UKIP now stands for, perhaps more unambiguously than it did before when we were regarded as a kind of single-issue party to get out of the EU, we now stand for national renewal. And as Bill was saying in his speech earlier on, that comes from within ourselves. That we have to be responsible for our own destiny. We have to take responsibility for our decisions and not have it loaded off onto some abstract entity called the state. Because what is the state ultimately but a collection of fallible individuals like you and me? Let's not leave it to the experts, because we've seen what they can do, haven't we? And it's not just on COVID, the so-called experts like Professor Neil Ferguson, who was so disastrously wrong in all his predictions, and has been in every single prediction that he's made in all the other bogus medical crises that we've seen in the last 20 years. But let's take the Bank of England, who've got their economic forecast so catastrophically wrong, and the Office for Budget Responsibility, which George Osborne created, boo hiss. He was my successor as Member of Parliament for Tatton, sadly to say. But creating the Office of Budget Responsibility has so constrained the Chancellor of the Exchequer that he can no longer make political judgments about economic policy. And so these unelected, faceless individuals, who are always useless, are now actually the ones who, in every meaningful respect, are governing the country. We don't elect them, we can't dismiss them, we don't even know, unless we're political nerds, we don't even know who they are. And so it's this miasma that we have to fight, and it's more difficult to fight because it's a miasma. We could see the enemy if it was Hitler or the EU. They're not that different because their ambitions in the EU are just as all-embracing as Hitler or Napoleon. They think they know best for us, and we need to be caged up and to do exactly as we're told and as they want. But in so many ways, I've enjoyed my political life, and I intend to carry on enjoying it, because fundamentally, what is the point of life if not to leave the world in a better state than you found it? So I'm feeling really invigorated, rejuvenated, in fact, by this conference today, and that's not only because you look so much older than me, but which you don't, of course, but but because we're all young in spirit, whatever age we are. And we are still vibrant in our approach to politics. And there's so much to hope for this country and so much to work for. And so that's what I'm going to continue to do. And I look forward to being with you, amongst you, and to fight with you all those battles upon which the future of our country depends for a great many years to come. Thank you for all the support you've given me over the years. I've 22 years now since I joined UKIP, and I've been almost everything in the party in those 22 years as well, culminating in the leadership. And I'm proud of us as a party, proud of you as a people, and proud of our country. Thank you.